Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is a very special place, this Baitak, for us to sit together. It's a bit out of the way, so only people who really want to be participating in a serious conversation probably get here and find their way here. So thank you for being here. We have already, as introduced, Susan, Ashok, Shashank, and myself. The theme of our session, looking up, looking down, is what we will be concentrating on. The hierarchy of India and Bharat. What is at the top, what is at the middle, and what is at the bottom? And who is listening to whom? And who is and should be learning from whom? How the light gets in, the title of Ashok's book. And linked with this is the incongruence of solutions from the very top, where there's wealth and there's supposed higher education and knowledge, the incongruence of those solutions for the people at the so-called bottom. And what is the middle learning? The middle learning, the most important connector, learning from whom, and what is the source of light within the diamond, the title of baby asleep, hidden within the folds of a threadbare sari. The young woman plays many roles. She earns for her family as a daily wage field worker. She fetches water and she hauls firewood over long distances. She cooks, she cleans, she cares for the cow, the goats, and the hens. She is hemmed on all sides, but even so, she tries to be a good mother. Through the course of a long afternoon, the young woman is silent and her dying baby sleeps. I stand rooted, that's Ashok, witness to an act of violence that is beyond comprehension. It is then that I notice a movement deep within the folds of her sari and a tiny face peering out at the world and then directly to me, at me. Difficult to define, and I turn away from that girl child's gaze, discomforted. That light from that tiny girl baby's eyes gets into Ashok's mind and lights up his whole book after that. Now, the two opening sentences of Shashank Mani's book, I have lived, again, opening sentences, I have lived two lives as an Indian. In one, the long tale of colonial history, mores, and culture, and a metro city-led discourse in English guided me. The second, in the India of small towns and districts, which exposed me to a culture that is circular, complex and vernacular, but exciting, emotive, and full of possibilities. And then he goes on in chapter 2, the diamond, a new metaphor. The top of the diamond has become economically strong through global connects, added by the 1991 economic reforms. This segment dominates the economic language of the country, global trade, and unicorn-directed entrepreneurship, and it's worth celebrating. However, the circle at the top of the diamond has become cozy and small, its members leaning on each other for economic transactions and relationships. A signal of this small and economically successful club comes from the social settings I sometimes find myself in. In a country of 1.4 billion people, it shouldn't be difficult to find complete strangers. However, in most social settings here in India, I find myself at only a 2 or 3 degree separation from others. 6 degrees of separation is the norm between any two human beings in the world, according to social scientists. However, Shashank says, the degrees of separation between India and Bharat is not 6, it may well be 16. So how the light gets into the minds of people like us, whose ideas shape our country in economic policies, Who is providing the solutions for whom? Who is looking into the eyes of the people not like us, like the dying baby in the lap of the poor mother in Barwani district? Recently, Davos has concluded up in Switzerland, and Jamie Dimon, the CEO of the world's largest financial institution by market capitalization, said, Davos is where billionaires tell millionaires what the middle class wants. Ashok, you've written about a 2-year odyssey to get some of the world's richest philanthropists to appreciate a more bottom-centered approach for helping poor people rise out of degrading powerlessness. Why is it so hard for powerful people to change their minds? You've got a mic there.
Well, I won't say I'm a powerful person or a very rich person, but I spent the first almost 2 decades of my career working to help rich people get richer. I worked in a firm called McKinsey & Company, a consulting firm. And for the next 20 years, I've worked with...
With a soft spoken, a little closer to you, not hearing.
Closer, yeah. And for the next 20 years, I've worked with 2 groups of women, 2 communities of women who've taught me a lot about leadership and how things should really work from the so-called bottom up. The first community was commercial sex workers. I worked with them over 6 states fighting HIV. And the second community which I work with now are, you could say, the community of very poor, pregnant, and lactating and new mothers, the kind I described in the opening paragraph. So that is where I've learned a very important truth, which is that the problems faced by very marginalized women are essentially the same. The woman depicted in that opening paragraph and a sex worker are essentially sisters, because these women face the same issues. They are usually dominated by strong men. They have no voice of their own. And they are utterly marginalized in home and environment. So just tell me if I'm saying too much, because I want to just finish this.
Please do.
This thought.
Mm-hmm.
So what did I mean by that? The women who face the same problem, they will also have the similar solutions because they're closest to the problem. They understand the root causes. And therefore, the logic would say, therefore, they would have the best solutions. But they live with these things. The problem is that men get in the way, either in prescribing solutions or funding programs, which is what you asked, which they don't comprehend because it's something way too distant for them. So was in a very dignified way. He said, sir, why don't you ask me why I don't use condoms? Don't tell me to use condoms. And when I asked her, why don't you do that? She said, because of violence. And I said, will you explain that to me? And she explained how every sexual transaction involves violence. And that led on to a program which averted more than 600,000 infections, all led by sex workers across the country. So it's this way of thinking. I don't like saying bottom and up because it really should be an inverted pyramid if at all you have that depiction. It's between the marginalized and those who have a lot. And those who have a lot and don't know, I don't want to say don't care, but don't know about how the other India works. And like Shashank, I think I've also experienced 2 very different Indias in terms of the attitude of people at the top and the heroism, day-to-day heroism of women like this that I've talked about.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And you already put it to Shashank. And, you know, his heart is, I think, in the same place as yours. And Shashank, in your book, you are talking about the middle class, the aspirational youth, and most of them are educated, with whom you've been traveling through India, but for them to experience India. I just wonder, who are they getting their ideas from? Who are their role models?
So this India that I talk about, three Indias. First, I think we belong to an India which is doing well. It's about 200 million people. There's a poor India, and much of what Ashok mentioned is probably there, but there's 800 million people, which is 10% of global humanity, which is not particularly poor, not particularly rich. And they cannot be equated as middle class. They are more emerging middle class, lower middle class also. And in that, when these young people come on this train journey, or what I'm doing in Devariya as an entrepreneurial ecosystem in 10 districts, I think many of the ideas they get from, or the values, are from faith, from family, and from community. And we often ignore that. And that middle is not just described by per capita GDP, which of course is one way of doing it. The average per capita GDP of that 800 million is about the same as the national average. And if you look at it in district terms, and there are 750 districts, of which only 240 districts have got about 800 million people, tier 2 and tier 3 districts. It's that India which requires a lot more thinking and enablement. And I think that, of course, many are allured by the bright city lights and what WhatsApp tells them and what Facebook tells them. But a lot of them are also, one interesting fact, we have 8,000 people who have come on this train journey over the last 16 years, and about roughly 10 times that have applied, about 80,000 people have applied, approximately. I would say 50% of them put their parents as a first role model. They believe that their family has a lot of things that they can be given to. So these are things that we need to understand, that culture, that local decentralized culture that they subscribe to, despite the huge onslaught about what I call Western modernity in my book. I think there is something fundamentally different about that middle. And I think there's another middle in Nigeria. There's a middle. I lived in Nigeria for 2 years as part of a company. And I think that the top echelons there have also patronized the middle for far too long. I also subscribe to the fact that the bottom 400 million require grant and subsidy and support. But my thesis of the book is that 800 million people are ready for enablement. We've got to recognize their strengths. We have to make sure that they rise. And that's the value that I see many of them subscribe to, those young people who come on the train.
Thank you, thank you. So you said, and I'm saying thank you because it's the profound question I had based on our discussion last night about the role of faith. And different cultures put faith into different symbols, but it's about faith. It's about faith, and you said women in communities, women in communities. And when we talk about maintaining your own culture and your own identity, I've been noticing that women are the last, or the later than the men in a population to give up the way they look. Women will stay with their own country's dresses, longer. Men will immediately dress up like other men because we want to be seen as equal to other men and work in organizations, which is good to be like everybody else. So we now, even today, we are imposing standards on women in cultures like France. And you in your culture might want to dress more modestly, a woman, but no, you've got to be modern and dress like us here in India too. And I noticed at BCG and McKinsey that young Indian girls who otherwise would call me much older than them, never call me by my first name, but always sir, or sometimes I would say, please, at least call me Mr. But very hard for them because G would be G, and sir in English, and so. But they also would start coming to office in short dresses, because it was a woman at work, better be modern and so. So the woman is always having to, who represents the culture. And if we let women not dress in the way our culture feels they should dress, I think we are giving up our culture. Second is food. We identify different cultures by the food they eat, and who cooks the food? And who knows what food to cook and what ingredients? It's always women. So, which is why I feel that women play a very important
banyan tree in my village has got women who protected it for the last 300 years standing. But at the same time, I think we have let our women down. I think we have not done enough. Like you were saying, there were so many things that a woman has to do: fetch firewood, cook food. Then we, in my case, I'm trying to make them an entrepreneur. I think we really have to create a women infrastructure. How do we make sure that, like somebody mentioned in the earlier session, that China has done very well in terms of. So I think yes, women will hold our culture aloft, but I think women also have to be given the front seat, which we often don't.
I'd like to disagree and agree. I mean, I think all of this depiction is true for middle class, maybe lower middle class or lower middle class women. The work I'm doing is for people who barely get a meal a day, whose clothes are threadbare, who can't feed their own child, with severe malnutrition. There, these questions of choices of dress and so on are not the issue. The issues are issues of fundamental survival. It's whether to survive or not to survive. You're almost at that brink. Now the point is this: at that very brink, my experience is this: that the sex worker who worked at 50 rupees a day, or saw 7 men a day, or the mother in the villages like I depicted, are capable of a tremendous heroism. In fact, all the faith I have in India is because of this inspiration. And there's a method to it. And that method also comes from the women. Now, it's a different matter. Their own children sometimes get an education and move on. It's very interesting then to see the change there is in that sex worker's child and so on. But this is, for me, the crux of the problem. If you can solve the problem there, I think much will go upwards.
And that is, I feel, you're quite right. And the crux of the problem, as you mentioned, about getting more women in India into the so-called workforce. You described a woman who was probably working much harder than all the men around in that place, right? Okay. So the question is, what is the value that we give to the work that women do naturally to sustain our families and our communities? We don't value that work economically. So work is not just a means of earning livelihood. It gives, your sentences, it gives meaning to an individual. Work, your words, so profound. Work, not money, is the fundamental source of our dignity. Work is where we build our character. Work is where we create value with our lives, offering up our talents for the service of others. And Ashok, you did say the young woman plays many roles. She earns for the family, etc. Do we value the work that women do to create and sustain life and keep the health of our communities? It does not add to the valuations of the worth of enterprises. So we want to pull women out of families into factories to do what men do. India, we say, has a shortage of women in the workforce. We just celebrated Republic Day, and just the image there, that in every army contingent, it was now women in uniforms, dressed like men, in front of our fighting forces. You have a quotation on your lovely chapter, Women Creative Force Multipliers. Lakshmi Bai was her name. The sole daughter of her father, sword, shield, dagger were her only companions. And I say, we are taking women out of their role and work as creative force multipliers, families, communities, because we don't value that, to become destructive force multipliers, army, which we value much more. And with that, I'm just going to ask Susan to come in, and yes, I'm sure both of you have some comments. Yes.
Sorry, I hope everyone can hear me. So your question is?
Anything now, I want you to bring, because you haven't written a book yet. So what would you write if this was the thought?
Actually, I have written a lot of books,
yes,
but they're never published.
Oh, there you are. We want to hear the published book now. Thank you.
So, I mean, thank you for the conversation, and I think that what you've both talked on is, I think, really quite inspiring. I was saying this earlier because in India, I think as a foreigner, I've been amazed at the capacity at local level. And, you know, the women in panchayats and their impact on the development of their communities, I think is, and it's actually globally noted and really unique. And so I think that it is about enabling a lot of the capacity that exists there so that women can have a chance to shape their own lives and the lives of their families and communities. And actually, years ago, I was looking at this issue about women's leadership, because there is a lot said about women as leaders are more likely to change development indicators. They're more likely actually to help us meet the SDGs, for example, because if women are educated, they will pay for the education of both their boys and girls. They will pay for household improvements such that they can afford. They will do, a whole lot of different things that add up to development. And so I was looking for, well, what is the evidence of women's leadership? There's a kind of we intuit that that's the case, but what is the evidence? And actually in India, there is really clear evidence through research that was done in the 90s with the Poverty Lab that showed the influence of women in panchayats and their leadership, and showed specifically that that panchayats that had a third women leaders were more likely to have five, which is on gender equality, and their global numbers are 3 million people 3 million women in local level government around the world. Well, 2 million of them are here in India. So, and then if you add the ASHA workers, the Anganwadi workers, the other women leaders at local level, there is a real force for change. And I think the issue is, how do you unlock that without coming in and saying you must do this and this and this, helping these women get their skills they need to play more of a role, helping them get the resources they need, like, digital resources, data, access to phones, etc. And of course, education and lifelong learning. Actually, UN Women does a program called Second Chance Education, which is helping women get back into education if they've had to drop out for various reasons. And also looking at skilling. I mean, the labour force participation rate in India is an issue, and both of you in your books talk about that. And there is a workforce growing in the agricultural sector, which is often the poorest paid and the most vulnerable jobs. So again, how do we help those jobs become more of a viable livelihood without it being like indentured labour, that people have to do to survive, along with everything else that they have. So, they're just some thoughts around the grassroots area. I think there is also the recent law to have more women in Parliament at the national level is equally crucial. Likewise in state governments, that law, I believe, covers state governments as well. But there's also the work that the private sector can do in their supply chains, for example, selecting women-owned businesses to be part of supply chains. There's a whole range of things that the private sector could do, and in changing social norms. That's the last area I want to touch on, because in India, one of the interesting statistics is that the higher educated you go as a woman, the less likely you are to have a job. That's quite different in a lot of other countries. And so that, I think, also indicates that the social norms that keep women as domestic workers are very strong. And what is needed to help women stop being the holders of the culture? How do you share that role with men? I think is important. And for example, childcare is such an issue. Anganwadis provide this at grassroots level. Women in urban centres, what do we do to help them? So that's just a very sort of jumbled up response to the question, because there is so much to say on this. Thank you.
That is exactly the point. Thank you. It's not jumbled up. It was so many things, and you say, let's put them together. And so, what may be some key new ways of thinking about it?
Yeah. It's difficult to make a general answer for women who are right at the bottom of the pyramid, somebody who's at the margin trying to get to be like a man, and so on and so forth. So I can only speak to one end of the spectrum that I know, and I'd be conjecturing about the rest. But in the part of the, and I'm tempted to say the vast India, number of people in India, it's not of a woman trying to achieve the level of a man in some sense. It's for the men who get in the way to get out of the way and to enable the women to get together. Now, this is not theory. This is what I've done for a long time. 10,000 sex workers in 6 states work together, and they basically snuffed out the growth of HIV in this country. It is not an exaggeration. It's been documented everywhere. We're now working with women who barely know about menstruation, and they're becoming a powerful force together. What is happening is that a few men help enable this process, recognizing that the agency of women, from awareness to influence to change agent, is a process. If you talk of women who've already moved up that ladder, then it's a separate set of issues that comes into play here. But I know that the heroism, I would call it the day-to-day heroism of women, is something to be admired. Now, we must also remember that this is not a pan-India statement that you can say. Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and more have shown that way already. There are some common factors there, such as education. But many states, or several states in northern India, face the kind of challenge that I have seen in Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Chhattisgarh.
Your Madhya Pradesh.
So, from a middle India perspective, I mean, those 800 million Indians who are not very rich, not very poor, I would say 3 things. Firstly, men and women have to go together. It's not that you can ignore the husband or the brother who's helping you. At the same time, power is seldom given. It has to be taken. And how is power taken in a democracy? Is through the ballot box. And why is Tamil Nadu and Kerala much better, despite the fact that they have slightly wonky ideologies, is because the Panchayati Raj was adopted properly there. If you go to Uttar Pradesh, only 3 strictures of the Panchayati Raj were adopted. In Bihar, only 2 were adopted. So while it's notionally there, I'll tell you an example. In Devariya, where I'm working, I attended a Gram Panchayat meeting of 70 Gram Pradhans. Not a single woman was there, because they were all Pradhan Patis. So the only way that we can get to strategic reform is what the Prime Minister has done recently, which is 33% reservation in the Parliament. And I hope that it doesn't become what has happened at the Gram Pradhan level, which is Pradhan Patis, MP Patis, etc. And the second thing is that if you look at voter trends, you talk about 2009, the difference between women and men vote was 4.5% nationally. Talk about 2019, 2014, 1.8%. 2019, it was 0%. Women are voting with the mind of their own. They're voting for the person who gets them development. And the point that I think Susan mentioned, there's a World Bank report which says that if you give 100 rupees to a man, 20 rupees will go in pan, bidi, tobacco. वही खा पी के मस्त हो जाएगा, 80 रुपए जाएगा समाज के लिए. यहाँ पर आप महिला को अगर 100 रुपए दो तो 100 रुपए समाज के लिए करेगा, बच्चे के पोषण के लिए, उसके खाने के लिए, उसकी पठन पाठन के लिए, इन सब चीज़ों के लिए. So it's about time that we realize that power has to be given in a democracy. Maybe China won't do it like this, they'll have other methods. And I think that there are 2 versions of this women empowerment. One of which is that we have to get away from this Abla Nari story. Women are not weak, they're very strong. They're strong by nature. I think they come across so many vicissitudes across the country. And me and Gauri, my wife is here, we did a Upnayan Sanskar of our 2 daughters because we wanted to make sure that when they were growing up, they didn't see the micro-exclusions that we give them. You know, we worship our goddesses as mother goddesses, but in day-to-day lives, we hardly ever treat them in the same way as we do men. So we jolly well started in an early time. जब तक पहले से शुरुआत नहीं होगी, बाद में चल के बोर्ड रूम के नॉक कर रहे हैं, औपचारिक रूप से हम ग्राम प्रधान बनवा रहे हैं, हम मेंबर ऑफ पार्लियामेंट बनवा रहे हैं, वो सिलसिला 25 साल पहले शुरू होना पड़ेगा, जहाँ पर असली महिलाओं को स्वीकार किया जाए.
Thank you. You introduced the word power, and you talked about leadership. Okay, the different forms of power, and the different forms of leadership. The question is, what is the setting within which, or what is the form of the organization in which leadership is required? I would say broadly, just to simplify, there are cooperative organizations and there are competitive organizations. Women, generalizing here, have an ability to find and use power to create cooperation, families and so. So the examples in India like Seva and others, Mandeshi Foundation, they are cooperative organizations, and therefore our movement, women's self-help movements in Bangladesh and here, they are leaders, but they don't use the same language and even methods as men when they are in leadership positions than men. Different panchayats once found this difference, that in those panchayats where the thinking and organizing is like the way the woman would do it rather than the way the man's doing it, they do work, yes. And I do want Susan.
Yeah, I work with sex workers. Street sex workers have a distance from here to there, another distance from here to there. These are territories. They are cutthroat competitors. Literally speaking, if a woman infringes, there will be violence. But in the evening and at night, these very same women are working together. They're going from competition to cooperation because there is common cause, and common cause is not let's stop HIV. Common cause is something else, tackling violence, which affects HIV and so on. That is the insightful solution they come up with. It's not we're getting to fight HIV, we'll fight a certain other common cause that has influence. So competitors of the most vicious kind come together in common cause. Only women can do this. I'm making it an outright statement. 12 women together are a force. 12 men together are having a drink.
Susan.
I think that, your question is incredibly complex. And so always I mean, there's so many stereotypes, aren't there? And so one of the stereotypes is that women are more cooperative than men. I actually don't know that's true. I think maybe they are, maybe they aren't. If they are, maybe it's because women often, we are, because of the social norms, we are often responsible for the survival of our households. So whatever we need to do that, we will do it, Whereas maybe men are one step removed, both biologically, but initially anyway, and then because of social norms. So, and also I think men often have more power to wield. So, they don't have to work with other men to put together their power. So I don't know. I think the jury's out. But whatever the answer is, I think that cooperation and that, in the feminist thought, we would say collective leadership is really, really important because it is about power sharing. And when you look at gender norms and the issues that women experience so often, it is because they have less power. So whatever we can do to turn that on its head, we should try and we should support.
Fine. And because I'm going to just pose now, as you said, very difficult to summarize all this. But we and the G20, we realized, the whole world, that our environment we are not taking care of. Climate change is out of control the way we are trying to address it. Okay? And in terms of inequalities and the breakdowns in trust within countries and between countries, we're at the lowest point that we have been, I would say, for 100 years and more. Okay? So India has said that there's some ancient wisdom that what the world needs a vision of is Vasudeva Kutumbakam. What is that? One family on one earth going together towards one future. That's Vasudeva Kutumbakam. One family on earth. For the last 50 years at least, very firmly, we've been driving globalization on the thesis, one economy exploiting one earth, and we hope to get a good future. Okay, so there's a contrast and the word family comes in again. So I don't care whether it's man or woman. We have to learn to live like a family, to cooperate with each other, not because I'm the boss, because we have different needs and different resources. That's what happens in a family. So to shift our minds about how I should be and what I should support in the family, community and the society should be, and therefore what power I can have and powers I should not have, are very profound questions for yourself.
So I would say that I am fairly aggressive in my books to say that colonialism and a certain amount of Western modernity has been the genesis of the environmental crisis that we are facing. When Cartesian logic took over 400 years back, there was a certain view that I am mind, you are matter, I need to conquer you. That's the way Cartesian logic worked. Whereas our itihas, our religions, our traditions, has always thought about an interconnected world. Aham Brahmasmi. We are connected. And therefore, the exploitative mores of what happened when Dutch army went to Java and conquered that, or the British came here, or the other things. And it has happened also in North America. I mean, the Indians were much more at peace with nature than they are now, right now. I think it's about time we examine the basis by which the modern global world has been constructed. It's been constructed by a metabolism of conquest. And I'll given a phrase in my book. I'm an active wildlife person and I go out and do hikes on the mountains. But George Mallory, when he was asked in 1928 as to why do you want to conquer Everest, he said, because it's there and I want to conquer it. The nature of the discussion was about conquest. We've never thought about that. And especially women have never thought about where I live in my village. When my banyan tree is standing for 300 years, not a single branch has been cut because it's revered. There are things which are revered in nature, and that is something which not just Indian, I think Taoist thoughts in China has the same issue, which has been wiped out by the Cultural Revolution. Akkadian thought of Mesopotamia had the same thought process. And I think a certain Western modernity came and wiped out that thinking. And we are currently at the same place where the same thinking, which is ESG, and I was a corporate honcho myself, right? I smirk at ESG because the same tools which created the same problem will not solve the same solution. It'll come from somewhere else. Einstein said that. And therefore, I think the kunji, the keys to this problem doesn't lie in the West, which is pretending that it is going to solve this. Net zero, मैं तो 4 साल से सोच रहा हूँ, कोई net zero नहीं रहा दोस्तों, ये green washing हो रही है. I think if we have to do net zero, you have to look in the tier 2, tier 3 districts of India, where a woman and a man, to your point, live lives which are much more at ease with the environment. There's much more circularity. There's much more organic. Those things that we have lost have to come back. I'm not suggesting everything was glorious in our past. We need to mobilize our own energies as a nation so we can re-energize ourselves for the next 25 years. Otherwise, we're heading down a cul-de-sac, which the West has created.
Thank you. Then we'll take some questions. Yeah.
In fact, I didn't think I'd be doing this. I'm going to talk about climate change. Because we are seeing it all the time, much greater levels of migration, family migration, that means woman goes along with this. That is happening because crop patterns have changed. There's an excessive amount of drought in the same villages where you have excessive amount of flooding. So therefore the crops are affected, and therefore people cross over from tribal Madhya Pradesh from the south into Maharashtra. And people go from North Karnataka again into Maharashtra, all because of crop patterns changing, because of climate change. Now you can't change climate change, as far as I know, overnight. But you can change the way women deal with this problem as well. I'll just leave it at that.
Very good. Thank you.
Sorry,
Yeah,
can I
one
just
thing?
add
Yes,
to that and
yes, sure.
say I completely agree, because otherwise we're likewise going to leave women behind in the equation, whereas women are often most affected by these kind of climate crises in their daily lives. So they often have ways of dealing with it, and very good ideas of how to do that as well. So we have to include them in it.
And the mindset, Susan, is that the people most affected, we must find solutions for them. This is the whole charity and white man's burden view. It's the other way around. The people most affected have the right solutions. They are most sensitive to the frugality of resources of the world. And they will have probably the best solutions which the old minds cannot have. No, I think we just asked for... Okay, sure. Okay.
Make it very short.
Yes.
What is required here is a profound change in mindset of men. And I'm talking for myself. I came out of McKinsey and Company. If some of you know that, you're paid a lot to give answers to people. It takes a lot. It took a lot of me to say, I don't know the answer of this. I'm no longer a strong man. I have to ask the way forward. This sounds all very metaphysical, but this is what the World Bank should do. This is what many big donors should do. You started the conversation why people's eyes glaze over, because they project themselves doing something that they can't do. I wonder if I'm making myself clear. This is extremely important.
That's
Ashok,
right.
can I just add one thing?
Yes.
Those questions cannot be asked from Davos.
From Davos. You have to ask.
Very well
okay,
put.
the three questions. I've got one woman here, one woman there, okay, and another woman. 3 women. Women are going to ask. You the youngest, I think, Bhavna. Yes.
Thank you, sirs, and thank you, for a very, very lovely session, very lovely chat. My question is around, Susan, you mentioned that climate change disproportionately affects women. I'd just like to understand that a bit more.
Second question, Bethan.
Hi, my question is that we talk about women empowerment and how you can have more women come realize their potential, but there's something called entrenched patriarchy within women, where Susan mentioned that women are not they are, I think, women's number one barrier to growth as well. So what would you like to say on that?
And Amita? At the back there. Okay.
A very quick question to Shashank. What did you mean by wonky ideologies of Kerala and Tamil Nadu? I'm a very proud Malayali, where you have the land reform movement, minimum wages being implemented, where women, 100% literacy, all of those things. You go to Tamil Nadu, where I studied, where Tamil is an ancient civilization, a language. Two states I'm immensely proud about. So I'd like to understand from you what you think is the wonky ideology there. I wish more states would follow the example.
Got it. So there are three questions, and as you can see, I'm glad I'm not in the answering seat when Amita is in the crowd. Yeah. And she's always doing what we say. She's never letting anyone who believes that they've got the solution think that they've got it completely. Okay? But we'll come to that last. It may be already answered by, let's take the three together, and each of you, please, take a couple of minutes.
So in terms of women are disproportionately affected, you have to look at the roles that women and men play and girls and boys play at household level. And so, it's often women who are responsible for going and getting water, for example, and dealing with the health issues that families may face because of water and lack of sanitation. So it's just one example that, if your river dries up, you have to walk further. It takes up more time. You have less time to put into possibly, activities that can make you some money, for example. So also when women and men are displaced, often the men go to cities to get work, whereas women stay at home on the farms working to hold the family together. So that's just some examples, but you can track the impacts by the roles often and the control over resources. And then on the unconscious biases that we all carry, that's kind of what I was getting with the idea of, that you were saying, Arun, about, women as sort of the holders of the culture. Often we are the enforcers of the culture as well. And often that's just simply because we've been raised in the same households. We've been, we've imbued all of those same cultural norms. And I think operating fantastically as national leaders, that changes people's mindsets as well. So some of the structural things, the policies that are created to give women, like benefits at household level, that can also disturb some of these more traditional roles when women have control over their own income at household level. So policies and financing are really important, as well as the work we each have to do as individuals on unpacking the impact of our own brains and our own backgrounds.
Yeah, there were two questions I'll touch upon very briefly. The first question about whether migration disproportionately affects the woman. I don't want to go there because this is distress migration, and when it's family migration, the whole family gets affected. You could take the view that a woman who's pregnant and has to work during that time and cannot avail of medical services may be a little bit more drastically affected. But coming to the second question you asked, ma'am, I think it had to do with patriarchy, correct? I totally agree with that. Patriarchy is a much bigger deterrent than the husband's role. It's the father-in-law who is doing the damage very often, because his yes or no is all that it amounts to. Yeah.
Enforcer of culture.
Mother-in-law reinforces the patriarchy, gives her power.
I think let's call them that it's a tag team sometimes, and they work in tandem. But I think I would still, anyway, let me not compare two evils here. But I was talking about the other point which nobody's raised, which is linked to the man, is rampant alcoholism, which prevails. Finally, to add some more fuel to the fire here, one of the reasons Tamil Nadu has done so well in health is because the entire ICDS system, from the bottom to the head of the ICDS, the diktat is that there have to be only women there.
Yeah, no, so firstly, I travel the country every year, 16 years in a row. 2 years I didn't do it because of COVID. And I would say Kerala and Tamil Nadu are the most beautiful locations I have. So I empathize totally with you. What I think is beautiful about these two places is that they were genuinely implemented the 73rd Amendment, right? That's the right thing. So you took up the wonky piece deliberately to provoke me. But let me answer you in that sense. What is wonky about Kerala is communist. Communism is dead all over the world. Hold on, now you got to hear my answer also. And secondly, what is wonky about Tamil Nadu is that they're giving freebies every time. If we have to have some jangar, then you have to have. Now, women are there in that place, which is about, it's a beautiful location. It's one of the best places. Kanyakumari is my all-time favorite. But I disagree with you that the policies in these two states today, governance-wise, are wonky.
Good. Amita, please allow me. I know can see.
We'll carry this over a whiskey conversation.
No, but I'm going to add something for the three of us to talk, perhaps. You've talked about ideologies, economic ideologies. Communism versus capitalism is an economic ideology. Freebies is a concept that current economists are doing when you give things to people because they really need them at that time. Okay, but they're freebies. Okay, so this is economics. I'm going to say we're talking about women's participation in workforces and in education. The one science in which a woman got the Nobel Prize last. In the physical sciences, Marie Curie and her husband, Marie Curie, got it twice, right at the foundation of the Nobel Prizes. Economics, which claims to be a science and the only social science awarded, a woman got a Nobel Prize after 64 men had got it. And that woman, Alina Ostrom, what did she get the Nobel Prize for? For work done in communities, how communities manage their natural resources, cooperatively govern themselves, equitably, fairly. Alina Ostrom. And most of her work was done in India. So here we are saying we have in our traditions and cultures new institutional solutions. And this is the new economics. And when Alina Ostrom got the Nobel Prize, most men said, what is to do with economics? What is that to do with economics? So we've got time for one more question, and I can see Dr. Mashelka. Oh, well, there's a woman there also, Ramesh. You want that woman? Okay, we'll take both those. The one woman and yourself. But just quick questions. There's a woman there at the back and a man here, Dr. Mashelka. Have you got the mic?
Am I audible?
3 minutes overall.
Hi,
So please, 30 seconds.
Quick question. Thank you for bringing up the...
Arun, one second.
Arun, it's a one-liner, just to support
one-liner,
what you're
yes.
saying. After Nobel Prize, the most precious honor is FRS, Fellowship of Royal Society. Gagandeep Kang got it after 350 years of Royal Society's formation.
Imagine an Indian virologist, Gagandeep Kang. He says after 350 years of scientists in that other award, not the Nobel Prize, awarding great science, gave it to a woman, an Indian woman, right? Wow, thank you. One last one. Yeah.
Sure,
Yes,
thank
young
you.
woman.
Thank you, sir, for bringing up the element of collaboration, because I was wondering in terms of
Can you speak a little loudly?
any of your... Am I
A little
audible
more
now?
loudly, please.
Am
We
I
can't hear.
audible now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I have a bad throat. All right. So I was wondering in terms of the collaborative elements, particularly in indigenous communities, the power structure used to be a circle. It was never a pyramid like it's now. And through all of your work, could you give us a couple of examples where it's not so much about taking the power, but men and women and trans folks and LGBTQI individuals, the entire community, collaborating and working towards the benefit of not just the community as a whole, but also the marginalized, and that would include providing them support.
So in other words, examples of governance where it
Yeah,
is
from,
collaborative, and what the principles are.
Community-led governance.
Which is Alina Ostrom's
Yeah.
whole book, actually, but yourself.
Yeah, just a quick question on indigenous communities where I work extensively. It's a much more understanding community situation. The men are not as harsh as I've depicted earlier about it. The power structure is pretty simple. In every group of women, again I'm coming back to that, you can make out from a long way away that who is the leader in that. It's a natural leadership that comes through. And she's not the woman who's speaking the most or making the most clear points.
Thank you. And
Yeah,
15
I
seconds
think,
to both of you, yes.
I think in my case there is women-led development is because development is seldom a technical or a financial act. It's actually a very human act. So in my case, there is a girl called Suvarna. She has got 100 women working on handicrafts. The way she brings up other women is inspiring.
And from another country where I worked with Indigenous communities in Papua New Guinea, a really good example was I developed training on elections. And, you know, I had all these kind of starting points of group rules, you know, what to do if someone dominated the conversation. I just got rid of that because there was no need for it in these Indigenous communities. People listened to each other. And actually, they didn't talk first, they listened first. And it's a completely different way of working.
thank you so much. Thanks, all three of you. I'm sure you'd say it's really thoughtful, insightful, inspiring session. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.